The year is 1932. The Great Depression has its cold hands wrapped tight around the throat of America. In the bread lines of Manhattan, men in tattered suits wait for hours for a bowl of soup, their eyes hollow with despair. Wall Street has crumbled. The factories are silent. The promise of the American dream feels like a cruel joke whispered in the dark. But there is one industry that is immune to the crash. There is one economy that is growing faster than ever, fueled by desperation and vice: the underworld. While legitimate businesses are boarding up their windows, the illegal lottery known as the numbers game is generating millions of dollars a day in nickels and dimes. And nowhere is this river of cash flowing faster than in Harlem. To the outside world, Harlem in the 30s is a cultural capital, the home of Duke Ellington, the Cotton Club, and the Harlem Renaissance. It is a place of poetry and jazz. But to the men who live in the shadows, Harlem is something else entirely. It is a gold mine. It is a densely packed square mile of potential profit where hope is sold for pennies. And watching this gold mine from 1,000 miles away, with eyes full of greed and a heart full of violence, is the most dangerous man in the world: Alphonse Capone, Scarface, the King of Chicago. By 1932, Al Capone is more than just a gangster. He is a modern Caesar. He has turned the city of Chicago into his personal fiefdom. He has judges on his payroll who dismiss murder charges before the ink is dry on the arrest warrant. He has police captains who act as his private security detail. He has an army of soldiers who have turned the Tommy gun into an instrument of terror, spraying lead across the windy city until the sidewalks are stained red. Capone has conquered the bootlegging trade. He has crushed the Irish gangs. He has silenced the newspapers. But Al Capone has a fatal flaw, a flaw that has toppled empires since the beginning of time. He is never satisfied. He looks at his bank accounts, overflowing with dirty money, and he feels empty. He wants more. He wants expansion. He wants to stretch his tentacles from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Capone looks east. He looks at New York City. For years, the 5 families of the Italian mafia have held an uneasy truce with Chicago. They stay in their lane, and Capone stays in his. But the Depression has changed the calculus. Money is tight everywhere, except in Harlem. Capone sees the numbers racket run by independent black bankers, and he sees low-hanging fruit. He sees a community that he believes is weak, disorganized, and ripe for the picking. He calls his top lieutenants into his office at the Lexington Hotel. The air is thick with cigar smoke and the smell of expensive cologne. He points to a map on the wall. He circles Harlem. He tells his men that the time has come to take what is theirs. He believes that the black bankers of Harlem will roll over the moment they see a Chicago typewriter. He believes that fear is a universal language, and he speaks it better than anyone. But Al Capone is making a miscalculation. A massive, arrogant, fatal miscalculation. He is looking at Harlem from a distance. He sees the poverty. He sees the overcrowding. He doesn't see the steel spine of the neighborhood. And he certainly doesn't see the man standing in the shadows, waiting for him. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, the man the streets call Bumpy. At this moment in history, Bumpy Johnson is not yet the Godfather. He is a rising star. He is the enforcer for Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the Queen of Numbers. Bumpy is different from the thugs Capone is used to dealing with. Bumpy is an intellectual. He is a student of history. He reads Shakespeare and Nietzsche in his spare time. He plays chess not as a game, but as a mental exercise to sharpen his strategic mind. While Capone operates with the blunt force of a sledgehammer, Bumpy operates with the precision of a scalpel. Bumpy knows the terrain of Harlem better than he knows the back of his own hand. He knows every alleyway, every rooftop, every cellar door. He knows which cops can be bought and which ones hold a grudge. He knows that in a war, the defender has the advantage, provided he has the will to fight. And Bumpy Johnson has will to spare. The invasion begins slowly. It doesn't start with explosions. It starts with a creeping infection. Strange men begin to appear in the jazz clubs and pool halls of Lenox Avenue. They wear suits that are a little too loud, fedoras tilted at aggressive angles. They speak with the flat, nasal vowels of the Midwest. They sit at the back of the room, watching, taking notes, counting the house. They are Capone's scouts. They are estimating the daily take of the numbers banks. They are identifying the key players. They are building a list of targets. The people of Harlem notice. In a tight-knit community, outsiders stand out like a flare in the night sky. The word spreads from the beauty parlors to the barber shops to the stoops. The Chicago boys are here. Trouble is coming. Bumpy Johnson hears the whispers. He sits in his favorite booth at the restaurant, eating his breakfast, listening to the reports from his runners. He doesn't panic. He doesn't slam his fist on the table. He simply nods. He continues to eat his grits. He is analyzing the board. He knows that Capone is testing the waters. He knows that the first move will be an offer, a diplomatic insult wrapped in a threat. And he is ready. The offer comes a week later. A meeting is arranged at a neutral hotel in Midtown Manhattan, away from the prying eyes of the Harlem precinct. Capone's representatives are three men with hard faces and cold eyes. They sit on one side of a mahogany table, looking bored. On the other side sit the Harlem bankers, the men and women who built the numbers game from nothing. They are nervous. They have heard the stories of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. They know what Capone does to people who say no. The lead Chicago man, a heavy-set enforcer named Frank, does the talking. He doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He lays it out. Capone wants 40% of the gross, not the profit, the gross. In exchange, he offers protection. He offers to keep the other wolves away. It is a classic protection racket. The implication hangs in the air, heavy and suffocating. If you don't pay for protection, you will need protection from us. The Harlem bankers look at each other. They are business people, not soldiers. They are thinking about their families. They are thinking about their survival. One of the older bankers clears his throat, preparing to negotiate, preparing to surrender. But before he can speak, a chair scrapes against the floor. Bumpy Johnson stands up. He has been sitting in the corner, silent, watching the Chicago men with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. He walks slowly to the table. He is not a giant man, but he carries himself with a terrifying stillness. He looks at Frank. He looks at the other two men. He sees their arrogance. He sees that they think they are dealing with inferiors. Bumpy smiles, but the smile doesn't reach his eyes. His eyes are dead. He reaches out and picks up the pitcher of water on the table. He pours a glass. He drinks it slowly, letting the silence stretch until it is almost unbearable. Then he sets the glass down. He leans in close to Frank, close enough to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "Tell Al," Bumpy says, his voice a low rumble that vibrates through the room, that he must have misread the map. This isn't Chicago. This is Harlem. And in Harlem, we don't pay rent to tourists. Frank laughs. It is a harsh, barking sound. He looks at Bumpy with amusement. "And who are you?" he asks. "The janitor?" Bumpy doesn't blink. "I'm the grievance committee," he says. "And your grievance has been denied. Now, I suggest you gentlemen finish your drinks and get back on the train, because if you are still in New York when the sun goes down, I can't guarantee that you will leave in one piece." The threat is delivered with such calm conviction that the laughter dies in Frank's throat. The Chicago men stand up. They button their jackets. They glare at the Harlem bankers. "You just made a big mistake," Frank says. "A fatal mistake." Al doesn't like to be disappointed. They storm out of the room. The door slams shut. The Harlem bankers turn to Bumpy, panic in their eyes. "Bumpy, what have you done?" they ask. "You just started a war with the devil himself." Bumpy lights a cigarette. He inhales deeply and blows the smoke towards the ceiling. "No," he says, "I didn't start a war. I just announced that we are fighting back. Go home. Lock your doors. Tell your men to get ready. Tonight, the devil comes to Harlem, and we are going to send him back to hell." Bumpy knows that Capone's response will be swift and brutal. Capone relies on momentum. He cannot let an insult stand. He has to crush the resistance immediately to show the rest of the country that he is untouchable. Bumpy predicts that the hit squad will strike that very night. He predicts they will target the headquarters of the numbers game or a popular social spot to maximize the terror. He predicts they will use the Chicago method, drive-by shootings with heavy automatic weapons. But Bumpy Johnson has a strategy that Capone's men aren't prepared for. He calls it the rat trap. He knows that the Chicago men don't know the streets. They rely on maps. They rely on main avenues. They don't know the shortcut through the tenement basement that comes out on the next block. They don't know the dead ends. Bumpy mobilizes his army. It isn't a traditional army. It is a guerrilla force. He stations men on the rooftops with crates of Molotov cocktails, bottles filled with gasoline and a rag fuse. He stations men in the alleyways with tire irons, baseball bats, and straight razors. He strips the neighborhood of anything that can be used as a weapon. He turns Harlem into a fortress. Night falls. The streets of Harlem are unusually quiet. The music from the clubs is muted. The sidewalks are empty. The air is thick with tension. Everyone knows something is happening. In the distance, the sound of heavy engines cuts through the silence. 3 black sedans with Illinois license plates turn onto 125th Street. They move slowly, like sharks patrolling a reef. The windows are rolled down. The barrels of Thompson's submachine guns poke out into the night air. The Chicago hitmen are scanning the street, looking for targets, looking for Bumpy Johnson. They are confident. They are untouchable. They are the kings of the underworld. They turn down a side street, heading towards the Rhythm Club, Bumpy's favorite hangout. They expect to find him there, drinking, laughing, unsuspecting. They tighten their grip on their triggers. But as the lead car passes the halfway point of the block, a delivery truck violently lurches out of a dark alley, slamming into a parked car and completely blocking the road ahead. The Chicago driver slams on the brakes. Tires screech. The convoy comes to a halt. Before they can shift into reverse, a second truck pulls out from behind them, blocking the retreat. They are boxed in. The street is a canyon of brick tenement buildings, rising 5 stories high on either side. Frank, sitting in the front seat of the lead car, realizes too late that they have walked into a kill zone. "It's a trap!" he screams. "Get us out of here!" But there is nowhere to go. Suddenly, the sky above them lights up. From the rooftops, dozens of lit bottles rain down on the convoy. They smash against the hoods, the roofs, the pavement. Gasoline splashes everywhere. Flames erupt with a whoosh, engulfing the cars in an inferno. The heat is intense. The Chicago men are screaming. They fumble with the door handles, tumbling out of the burning vehicles, coughing, blinded by the black smoke, their clothes singed. They try to raise their Tommy guns, but they can't see what they are shooting at. They spray bullets wildly into the air, shattering windows, chipping brick. But the enemy isn't above them anymore. The enemy is all around them. Out of the smoke, Bumpy's men emerge. They move like ghosts. They don't use guns. Bumpy has given strict orders: no gunfire unless absolutely necessary. Gunfire brings the police. This is personal. This is hand-to-hand. The fight is brutal, chaotic, and short. The Chicago men, disoriented and terrified, are no match for the ferocious assault of the Harlem defenders. They are beaten down with bats. They are slashed with razors. It is a primal release of rage, years of frustration against a world that tries to crush them, focused entirely on these invaders. Bumpy Johnson stands at the edge of the chaos, watching. He is calm. He sees his strategy unfolding perfectly. He sees the fear in the eyes of the Chicago men. He sees the moment their spirit breaks. When the violence settles, the 3 cars are burning skeletons. The Chicago hitmen are lying on the pavement, groaning, broken, bleeding, but alive. Bumpy walks through the smoke. He steps over the debris. He finds Frank, the man who laughed at him in the hotel. Frank is on his knees, clutching a broken arm, his face a mask of blood and soot. He looks up at Bumpy, and for the first time, he sees the true power of Harlem. He doesn't see a janitor. He sees a general. Bumpy crouches down. He doesn't shout. He speaks in that same low, rumbling voice. "I told you," Bumpy says. "I told you to get back on the train. Now look at you. You're a mess." Frank tries to speak, but he can only wheeze. Bumpy leans closer. "I'm letting you live," Bumpy whispers. "Not because I'm merciful, but because dead men can't deliver messages. I want you to go back to Chicago. I want you to walk into Al's office. I want you to bleed on his nice rug. And I want you to tell him exactly what happened here tonight. Tell him that his guns don't work here. Tell him that his money is no good here. Tell him that if he ever sends another man to Harlem, I will send him back in a pine box, piece by piece. Do you understand me?" Frank nods weakly. He understands. He understands that he has met a force that cannot be bought or bullied. Bumpy stands up, He signals to his men. "Load 'em up," he says. "Get 'em to the train station. Buy 'em tickets. One way." As the battered survivors are dragged away, Bumpy takes a moment to look at the burning wreckage. The firelight dances in his eyes. He knows this is not the end. He knows Capone is a vengeful man, but he also knows that he has changed the rules of the game. He has proven that a united Harlem, led by a strategic mind, can stand against the might of the American mafia. He adjusts his fedora, turns his back on the flames, and walks away into the night. He has a chess game to finish, and he is already thinking 3 moves ahead. The retreat of the Chicago boys was not merely a tactical victory. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through the bedrock of the American underworld. In the days following the ambush, the story of the burning cars and the beaten hitmen traveled faster than a telegraph wire. It was whispered in the speakeasies of Boston, debated in the back rooms of Philadelphia, and analyzed with cold precision in the Italian social clubs of Brooklyn and the Bronx. For years, the name Al Capone had been synonymous with invincibility. He was the modern-day Genghis Khan, a force that simply rolled over everything in its path. To defy him was madness. To defeat him was impossible. Yet, in a few chaotic minutes on a darkened Harlem street, the impossible had happened. The unstoppable force had met an immovable object, and the force had broken. Watching this unfold with the eyes of a predator was Charles "Lucky" Luciano. By 1932, Luciano was already dismantling the old ways of the mafia and building something new, something corporate. He was a visionary who despised the chaotic violence of men like Capone. He believed in order. He believed in profit. And most of all, he believed in stability. Sitting in his office, surrounded by clouds of cigar smoke and the hum of ticker tape machines, Luciano realized that the landscape of New York had fundamentally changed. He saw that trying to conquer Harlem by force, as Capone had attempted, was a fool's errand. It was a waste of ammunition, a waste of manpower, and a magnet for police attention. He realized that the black bankers of Harlem were not a rabble to be crushed, but a power structure to be negotiated with. And at the top of that structure stood Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Luciano was a pragmatist. He didn't care about the color of a man's skin. He cared about the color of his money. He saw in Bumpy Johnson a mirror image of himself, a man who valued silence over noise, a man who understood that dead bodies are bad for business, a man who played chess while the rest of the world played checkers. Luciano decided that he didn't want a war with Bumpy Johnson. He wanted a partnership. He knew that if he could bring Bumpy into the fold, if he could secure the cooperation of Harlem rather than its submission, the profits would be limitless. The Chicago invasion had failed because it was an act of aggression. Luciano's invasion would be an act of diplomacy. A week after the bruised and battered Chicago hitmen were put on the train back to Illinois, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb on 125th Street. It stood out against the worn pavement and the struggling storefronts, a gleaming symbol of downtown power. But this time, the windows didn't roll down to reveal gun barrels. The door opened, and a neatly dressed associate stepped out. He walked directly into the pool hall where Bumpy held court. The room went silent. The clack of billiard balls stopped. Every eye was on the Italian messenger. He didn't flinch. He walked up to Bumpy, handed him a thick envelope, and delivered a simple message. Mr. Luciano would be honored if you would join him for dinner. The invitation was a test. If Bumpy refused, it would be an insult. If he showed up with an army, it would be a sign of weakness. Bumpy Johnson understood the language of the invite perfectly. He accepted. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a high-end Italian restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, a place where judges and senators rubbed shoulders with mob bosses. On the night of the meeting, Bumpy Johnson walked in alone. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, a fedora tilted just so, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had just slain a giant. As he walked through the dining room, the conversation died. The patrons knew who he was. They knew the rumors. They looked at him with a mixture of fear and awe. Luciano was waiting in a private room at the back. When Bumpy entered, Luciano didn't remain seated. He stood up. He extended his hand. It was a gesture of respect that spoke volumes. They sat down, two kings from two different worlds, separated by race and geography, but united by ambition. The waiters brought wine and food, moving invisibly, terrified to interrupt the history that was being written at the table. Luciano began to speak. He didn't threaten. He didn't bluster. He spoke like a CEO proposing a merger. He commended Bumpy on his handling of the Chicago problem. He admitted that Capone was a headache for everyone, a loose cannon who brought too much heat and not enough sense. He told Bumpy that the 5 families had watched the ambush with great interest. Then he leaned forward and laid his cards on the table. He proposed an alliance. The Italians controlled the heroin supply coming into the ports. They controlled the police downtown. They controlled the judges. But they didn't know Harlem. They didn't know the streets, the people, the rhythm of the neighborhood. Luciano proposed that the Italians would supply the product and the protection from the law. Bumpy would control the distribution in Harlem. He would keep the peace. He would ensure the money flowed smoothly, and in return, he would get a cut that would make him the richest black man in America. It was a deal with the devil, and Bumpy knew it. He knew that heroin was a poison. He knew that aligning with the mafia meant compromising the independence of the Harlem bankers he had fought to protect. But he also knew the alternative. If he said no, the Italians would eventually come. And unlike Capone, they wouldn't come with 3 cars. They would come with 300. They would come with the full weight of the political machine. It would be a war of attrition that Harlem could not win. Bumpy was looking at the long game. He realized that the only way to save his neighborhood from total destruction was to control the destruction himself. He looked Luciano in the eye. The room was silent. The only sound the clink of silverware in the main dining room. "I will accept your terms," Bumpy said, his voice steady and low. "But I have one condition." Luciano raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Inside Harlem," Bumpy continued, "I answer to no one. My word is law. If one of your men disrespects one of my people, I deal with him my way. I don't ask for permission. I don't call a sit-down. I handle it. And you stay out of it." It was a bold demand. Bumpy was telling the most powerful criminal in the country that Harlem was a sovereign nation. Luciano looked at Bumpy for a long moment. He was measuring him. He saw the steel in Bumpy's eyes. He saw the intelligence. And he smiled. He raised his glass of wine. "Agreed," Luciano said. to Harlem. They clinked glasses. The deal was struck. In that moment, the independent era of the old numbers bankers ended, and the reign of the Godfather began. Bumpy Johnson walked out of that restaurant, not just as a gangster, but as an untouchable institution. He had done what no one else could do. He had forced the mafia to treat him as a partner, not a servant. He had looked the devil in the face and negotiated a truce. For the next 30 years, the peace held. While the rest of the country went through the upheaval of World War II and the Civil Rights Movement, the alliance between Bumpy Johnson and the five families remained solid. Al Capone, the man who had tried to take it all by force, met a pathetic end. He was eventually brought down, not by bullets, but by tax evasion. He spent his final years in Alcatraz and then in a Florida mansion, his mind rotting away from untreated syphilis, raving at ghosts, a broken shell of the man who once terrified a nation. Bumpy Johnson, on the other hand, ascended. He became the undisputed king of Harlem. He moved through the streets like royalty. He wasn't just a boss, he was a fixture of the community. He understood that power wasn't just about fear, it was about love. He became a Robin Hood figure. When a family was about to be evicted because they couldn't pay the rent, an envelope of cash would mysteriously appear under their door. When a bright kid wanted to go to college but didn't have the tuition, Bumpy wrote the check. He handed out turkeys at Thanksgiving. He paid for funerals. He settled disputes between neighbors before the police even knew there was a problem. But beneath the philanthropy, the razor was always there. Bumpy never let anyone forget that his kindness was a choice, not a weakness. When a young dealer tried to cheat him, Bumpy didn't yell. He simply invited the man for a walk. They would talk about life, about business, and by the end of the walk, the young dealer would be terrified, ready to pay back every cent with interest. Bumpy ruled through a psychological dominance that was far more effective than violence. He was the professor. He was the chess master. He was always 3 moves ahead. The story of his war with Capone became a legend, a founding myth of the neighborhood. In barber shops and pool halls from 110th Street to the Polo Grounds, old-timers would tell the story to the young bloods. They would swear they saw the fires that night in 1932. They would describe the smell of the burning rubber and the sound of the Chicago men begging for mercy. They would embellish the details. Some said Bumpy fought 10 men alone. Some said he caught a bullet with his teeth. But the core of the truth remained. In a time when black men were expected to step off the sidewalk for white men, Bumpy Johnson had made the scariest white man in America step back. It gave the people of Harlem a sense of pride, a secret knowledge that their protector was tougher than the boogeyman. But time is the one enemy that cannot be defeated or negotiated with. As the 1960s rolled around, the world began to change again. The heroin epidemic, which Bumpy had managed and profited from, began to tear the fabric of the community apart in ways he hadn't anticipated. The Black Power movement was rising, challenging the old order. Young militants looked at Bumpy not as a hero, but as a relic, a collaborator who had sold out his people to the Italians. Bumpy felt the shift. He was tired. His heart was failing. The years in prison, specifically the decade he spent in Alcatraz on a drug conspiracy charge, had taken their toll on his body. He tried to adapt. He met with Malcolm X. He offered his protection to the civil rights leaders, understanding that the struggle for equality was the next great battle. But he was a man of a different era, a man of codes and silence, in a world that was becoming loud and chaotic. He watched as the mafia families began to squabble among themselves, the discipline of Luciano replaced by the greed of younger bosses. He saw the writing on the wall. The game was ending. On July 7th, 1968, the end finally came. It didn't happen in a hail of gunfire. It didn't happen in a prison cell. It happened in the place Bumpy loved most, Wells Restaurant in Harlem. It was the early hours of the morning. Bumpy was eating his favorite meal, scrambled eggs, grits, and coffee. He was surrounded by his closest friends, the men who had stood by him since the Capone days. He was laughing, telling a story, holding court one last time. Suddenly, he clutched his chest. The pain was sharp and immediate. The heart that had withstood the pressure of the underworld for 40 years finally gave out. He collapsed into the arms of Junie Bird, his lifelong friend. There were no last words of vengeance, no dramatic speeches, just a quiet exit for a man who had lived a loud life. The king was dead. The news hit Harlem like a physical blow. People wept in the streets. Shop owners pulled down their shutters out of respect. It felt as if the roof had been ripped off the neighborhood, leaving everyone exposed to the elements. His funeral was one of the largest Harlem had ever seen. Thousands of people lined the streets to watch the procession. They didn't come to mourn a drug dealer. They didn't come to mourn a criminal. They came to mourn a protector. They came to pay respects to the man who had stood on the corner of 125th Street and drawn a line in the sand that even Al Capone couldn't cross. History books often overlook men like Bumpy Johnson. They focus on the Capones, the Lucianos, the Godfathers of the movies. They paint organized crime as a story of Italians in expensive suits. But the streets remember. The streets know that when the unstoppable force of Chicago met the immovable object of Harlem, it was the force that broke. They know that the king of Harlem didn't need a machine gun to win a war. He just needed a mind sharp enough to outthink the devil, a razor keen enough to cut the tension, and the will to stand his ground when the whole world told him to run. Al Capone died a prisoner. His empire crumbled, his mind lost in the fog of disease. Bumpy Johnson died a free man, surrounded by friends, the undisputed champion of the only game that mattered. Even today, if you walk down the streets of Harlem and ask the old men playing chess in the park, they will tell you, you can run the world. You can own the politicians. You can have all the money in the bank. But you do not run Harlem. That territory belongs to the ghost of Bumpy Johnson, and the message he sent in 1932 still echoes off the bricks. Stay out. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.